morning, and thanks everyone for joining the APAC Financial Wellness webinar. We are celebrating World Refugee Day today, and it is my pleasure to introduce a fantastic panel who has so much experience in this space, as well as my wonderful partner, Mariko. But before I start, let me acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne, in Australia. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Displaced persons and refugees are not someone that is outside our wonderful world that we live in Australia. And for me, I have a lot of personal experience, as both my parents were refugees in the partition of India. So I am so pleased to have this fantastic panel talking about a wonderful topic that I'm so passionate about, which is financial wellness. I'll hand over to my partner, Mariko, to have the questions for our panelists. Over to you, Mariko.
Thanks so much, Vinita. We are thrilled today to acknowledge World Refugee Day with our discussion with our brilliant guest today, whom we'll introduce momentarily. We at the APAC Financial Wellness Initiative are pleased to be hosting this discussion about the well-being of the world's most vulnerable communities, specifically refugees and the displaced. While this topic can be considered difficult, we feel that raising awareness and openly discussing about their plight is imperative to progressing their aid and well-being. For many, refugee camps and the displaced are just a faraway problem. Here are some facts to give some broader context. According to UNHCR, at least 80 people around the world have been forced to flee their homes. Among them are over 26 million refugees, around half of whom are under the age of 18. And 45.7 million of these displaced people are internally displaced within their own borders. There are also 4.2 million stateless people who have been denied a nationality and lack access to basic rights such as education, healthcare, employment, and freedom of movement. Here to share their expertise and firsthand experience with various global refugee crisis centers, we have Dr. Iftikhar Mahmood, founder of the Hope Foundation for Women and Children, Gina Deswert, author of the book Refugee, an international midwife and advocate for global maternal and reproductive rights, as well as Gregory Matthews, Deputy Regional Director, Asia at the International Rescue Committee. So Greg, we'll start with you. Can you please introduce yourself and share with us the specifics of your particular role at IRC and an overview of IRC here in Southeast Asia as well as globally?
Great, thanks very much, Mariko and Vinita. Nice to be here with you this morning, and thanks for the great introductions. Yeah, so I'm Greg Matthews. I work for the International Rescue Committee. I've been working with the IRC for about 9 years now, and the IRC is a big international NGO. We work in over 40 countries around the world, both in places where people are affected by conflict and crises and disasters, as well as the places where people are ultimately resettled. We do quite a bit of work in the United States and throughout Europe in terms of helping refugees kind of find a permanent home and get settled in a permanent place. So the IRC is an organization that works across the whole arc of a crisis, from the initial conflict or displacement or disaster all the way through permanent solutions for those people. We've been started in 1933 at the request of Albert Einstein to support Jews who were fleeing Europe after World War I, prior to the start of World War II. And since then have just grown quite a bit. I've got the privilege of working with the IRC in Asia. I've worked in a lot of different contexts in the Middle East, in East and West Africa, and now over the last 3 years, I've been supporting our work in our country offices and our fantastic teams in the Asia region. And so in Asia, the IRC works across Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, and Philippines, providing a whole range of services that supports both people who are displaced internationally or within the borders of their own countries, as well as the communities that welcome and receive and host those displaced people. And our work is really about identifying communities that what communities themselves want to achieve, and then support them in meeting those goals. We do quite a bit of work in health, education, livelihoods, as well as specifically working with vulnerable populations who are targeted for violence of various sorts. We spent quite a bit of time countering gender-based violence and helping to create enabling and protective environments for women and adolescents, as well as for children, both from early childhood education and development all the way through adolescence and into adulthood, and helping to support populations throughout the range of their experiences growing up in displacement contexts and the communities that support them and have been affected by a lot of the disasters that are affecting the refugees as well. Oh, Mariko, you're on mute.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Greg. And over to you, Gina. Can you please share with us your background in global assignments as an international midwife?
Of course. So I'm a certified professional midwife, and I have a master's degree and background in political science. I began serving in a humanitarian capacity in 2016, shortly after I graduated from midwifery school. Since then, I have worked in refugee camps in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, focusing primarily on serving and helping Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees, and Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. I've also done relief work in Mexico, working with migrant populations coming up from Central and South America. And most recently, I have spent time in Ecuador working in an under-resourced area there as well. I've had the opportunity to work with multiple organizations across the world. I do prefer to work as an independent midwife, so I'm not really associated with one specific organization long-term. Instead, I work with multiple ones depending on the situation and the crisis and the country in which I'm working.
Wow, thank you so much. That's fascinating. And also, finally, over to you, last but not least, of course, Iftikhar, can you tell us about your background and then also the Hope Foundation and the work you've been doing in Bangladesh?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me and with nice and experienced colleagues, and whom I've come to know that we work in the same area for some time. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. I'm a pediatrician by training, and I am from Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. I have moved to US over 30 years ago. My passion is to help anybody need my help as a doctor or as a person. And I have been driven by that passion from since I was in high school. So I started Hope Foundation to help people in Bangladesh, because that's what I have experienced some needs. And I started 22 years ago as a small organization, personally, that as a small gesture to our community. It has grown over 22 years. It has become a sizable organization. We have built hospitals. We have built birth centers across southern part of Bangladesh. We have about 27 small and medium-sized health centers. We have multiple hospitals. We train midwives. Nice to meet Gina as midwife. And we have been training midwives in 2013. And we also have a strong program in obstetric fistula, elimination of obstetric fistula. Well, we have, I got introduced to humanitarian work, refugee work since 2017, when in August, when there is almost 1 million people took shelter in Cox's Bazar, where I was born and brought up. And my organization has been working, and we have been specialized in maternal health since for many years. And then when these refugees came, and we realized that there are a very large number of women, not only they're pregnant, but many of them lactating, many of them need the services for their delivery. And we immediately moved in within days, and we set up clinics and hospitals for them. And we have set up largest field hospital for women inside the camp that provide the only hospital that provide 24/7 emergency obstetric care. And we accept referral from all over the camp. And we are very privileged to provide that services. We consult over 150,000 refugees every year for last 3 years, and we keep going. We partner with many organizations. We work alongside IRC and many of the organizations that Gina worked with in Cox's Bazar. That's how we got to know each other, about each other. But this is the first time I'm meeting Gina online, but Gina probably have been to our clinics in Cox's Bazar. So very pleased to be here, and I'm glad that you invited me. Thank you.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you all, and I'm glad to bring you all together. And I think it's we're lucky to have you here. For our audience's sake, Iftikhar, I'm going to stay with you a moment. Can you please help define the difference between a refugee, a displaced person, an internally displaced person, and statelessness? I think many in our audience might not know the difference between all these terms.
Sure. So displaced person, that by definition, we tell them if they are forced to leave their home and move to someplace else. Either because of some reasons, of course, but it can be some deliberate reasons, like there is a war, there is a conflict, or it can be a natural disaster or some kind of a technological problem that we have seen in places like Chernobyl in India and places like that. So they basically forced to leave their home. And when they actually stay in their own country under their government, we call them internally displaced. And they still fleeing, like leaving their home against their will, actually. But when they cross the border, that international border, go to another country to stay and live and that take shelter, we call them refugees. Mostly in case of refugees, they're victim of some kind of political violence and war, and they also probably belong to some specific group, or they're discriminated because of a race, religion, or belonging to some membership of some groups. In terms of Rohingya refugees whom we work with, they have been the victim of ethnic cleansing because of their race inside Myanmar. We can talk about that later, but that brings us to the stateless people. So Rohingya refugees are both stateless and refugees, because in 1982, although Rohingya people have been living in Myanmar, according to history that I know, over 700 years, and they have been to many ups and downs in the political process in Myanmar. But in 1982, the government, Myanmar government, didn't recognize them as an ethnic group, and that ethnic group they have, and they say that you are not our citizen, you belong to some other countries. They want to indicate that they belong to Bangladesh, but they are not. So they have taken their rights as a citizen, so they don't have right for education, all the health, the voting rights, or any other things. So they have been the kind of persecuted, and they became stateless. And there are like a lot of back and forth since 82. Finally, there was a huge push that over 800,000 people are forced to move to Bangladesh in Cox's Bazar area. But before that, they have been already tortured in many ways, burned, the killing, rapes, and all kind. So these are we call them, stateless people. They have no states.
Got it. Over to you then, Gina. Having worked at refugee camps with people that have fled violence, as well as those displaced from natural disasters, not national, sorry. What have you observed that are commonalities in all of these situations as far as the individuals you've encountered?
Sure. So there's actually a lot of different commonalities, and there's multiple areas of need that are similar across each of the different types of crises. And the needs often depend on the specific context. There's some of the main areas that I've seen is that there's a significant need for assistance in helping refugees, migrants, and other displaced individuals in navigating the asylum process. The people that I have worked with often have a general idea of what they're supposed to do, but they lack the support and resources required to navigate the process efficiently.
Mhm.
And in those situations, the policies are often changing quite rapidly, and the ability to convey or communicate the changes in policies is quite slow. And so there's often a trickle down effect. So the information is changing, and it takes a long time to get down and reach the people that the information actually applies to. So often you find that refugees and migrants are going off of outdated information. So by the time they actually get to the point where they're having their asylum meetings or they're submitting the applications, they're meeting roadblocks and barriers because the information they had is no longer correct. In a maternal and reproductive health context, I've noticed across all situations, there's an initial reluctance to actually seek out healthcare services. I don't know if this is specific to maternal and reproductive healthcare, but it often takes a lot of time to integrate into the community and make yourself known and communicate that there's these resources here, they're available, please come seek them out. So that can be kind of difficult to establish, especially at the onset. And there's also a significant issue across all settings where if babies are being born, there's the issue of statelessness. And so we have families that are running into the issue of trying to figure out how to legally register their child in the country that it's born, because they don't have the option to register, for example, like a birth abroad. Proving that the child was born in the country that they are now residing can often be very, very difficult. And then finally, one of the biggest issues is mental health needs. There is a lot, especially people, well, in all contexts, but especially fleeing war and violence, we see a lot of PTSD, compound PTSD, intimate partner violence, sexual assault-based trauma, severe anxiety and depression, suicide, you name it, we've seen it and experienced it. And often there are not adequate resources to address the acute mental health needs of the refugee and migrant populations. And even once they integrate into a country or they seek asylum and they're in the process of trying to rebuild their lives, there is still a significant lack of mental health resources available to them to be able to help move through and kind of essentially recover and be able to take steps forward.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there, a lot of issues all at once. So you've pretty much answered the next question as well about the greatest immediate needs of individuals that you're coming across. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Iftikhar, then. If you could share with us what you see as the greatest immediate needs of individuals that you've seen during your work on the ground, as well as their needs over and above health.
Iftikhar, are you asking?
Yes,
me? Okay,
yes,
fine.
I'm asking you,
Thank you.
and then I'll share this with Greg as well.
Sure,
So.
sure. So immediate need, of course, we have seen that the shelter, the food, the protection, these are the immediate need. Since I work in health mostly, I can tell you that Gina already mentioned there is a great need for sexual reproductive health. There are a lot of women who are pregnant and who are ready to give birth, because I personally know many women, they actually gave birth when they were coming on the way from the Myanmar to Cox's Bazar.
Wow.
And of course, what can happen in that kind of situation.
Right.
So these are also in our case with our experience that I've seen that in Cox's Bazar, the living condition is really bad. It is the area is small. There's over 1 million people, the refugees, and the density is about 46,000 people per square kilometer. And they live in a small bamboo hut, 5 to 7 people in a family. And the clean water, the toilet, these things are beyond reach. So maybe about 10% of the people can have access to clean water. There are some studies done. There are also, because of the way they live, there are like cases of outbreak of measles, diphtheria, tuberculosis, cholera. Also, there are like, we don't know, Gina mentioned about mental health is a huge problem. I mean, almost 90% of the women, either they have depression or anxiety. There are like 36% or plus the woman has PTSD, women and men. And also the other thing that we should mention here that we don't pay attention to as much as we should, that is that non-communicable diseases. For example, hypertension. There are over 50% of the people, adult has hypertension, and almost 15% have diabetes. And as a physician, I can tell you that these treatments are expensive. It's not cheap, providing insulin and all this. Other things like that we should mention here, maybe we'll discuss a little bit about now COVID is going on. They have no access to education. And Gina mentioned about gender-based violence and all this. So there are a whole range of things. I mean, they are being deprived of. So I think that, it's great that we're discussing this, because if we discuss it and we can, everybody and other sectors can come together to help this. I'm sure this is the same condition in other refugee camps. Depends on how long the refugee camps are. If it's 3 years or 30 years. When it is longer, there will be different set of problems, of course. In our case, Rohingya camp is about 3 years. So I will stop there, and I will like to see what Greg thinks. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being very specific about all the many issues that are there. Greg, how about you? Can you share with us what you think the greatest immediate needs of individuals are that you've seen, as well as over and above health?
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to pick up where Dr. Iftikhar left off in his last comments there. The needs do change so drastically from one place to another. I mean, I'm based in Thailand right now. There's about roughly 80,000 refugees in camps in Thailand who have been there in the same camps and the same populations for roughly 40 years. So we're talking about multiple generations of people born in the camps whose children have been born in the camps. The needs of that kind of that population, or the individuals within that population who are settled, vary quite drastically from the needs that Gina and Dr. Iftikhar just described in Bangladesh. And also, and the Rohingya population in Bangladesh, majority of whom have been there for about 3 to 4 years now. And that varies even more from a population, for example, in Afghanistan, who was just displaced by recent fighting. Maybe we were displaced yesterday or last week. The needs at each of those different points in time, each of those journeys that the refugee populations or displaced populations take, are so different. In Thailand, our focus is really on finding a permanent solution. After 40 years, where will people go, and how will they proceed along that pathway? Where do they want to go? Understanding what are the needs and the aspirations of the population, of the individuals. Because everybody is different within a population like this. We talk about refugees as if it's a homogenous group, right. But it is really, there's so much nuance within that. And people have different needs and different desires. And then trying to support each of those different pathways that people see and are setting out for themselves. Because it really is, there comes a point where it's about the choice and empowering those refugees or those people with the choice that they have. Or that they can have within the constraints that they're facing as displaced.
Thank you, Greg. That's a really great point about various needs depending on how long they've been in a particular camp, as well as the location and situation. So great points on that. I'll stay with you though. I'm going to go on to reference one of the reports that IRC has been involved with. So basically, what we'd like to know is, are there needs for cash and or assets from where people have been displaced from, either from conflict or natural disaster. And for those that do have cash or assets in hand when they flee, is it then a security risk? And are there ways that this risk is being mitigated? And then also, can you tell us about the terms, I know I'm adding a lot here in one question. Can you tell us about the terms survivelihood and the path to livelihood for refugees as referenced in the finance and displacement studies, the research initiative you worked on with the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, as well as a definition of financial health for displaced persons? There's a lot there, sorry.
No problem. Maybe I'll start with the first piece of that, the questions around kind of types of assistance and cash assistance. And the traditional kind of humanitarian assistance is kind of taking things, stuff, be it tents or buckets of water or kind of hygiene kits or kitchen items, and loading it into a big truck and driving it out to a place where people are, and then distributing things in-kind distributions. That's probably what most people understand when they think about humanitarian assistance. And the reality is that kind of humanitarian aid is shifting quite drastically. And there's in all of almost everywhere in the world, the assets and the things that people need are available, whether it's food, whether it's housing material, whether it's blankets or kitchen items, or anything else. These items are usually available in local markets, and the needs that people have are not the same from one to another. So there's been, over the last 10 years or so, a big push and shift towards providing people cash assistance, which is actually just giving people money so that they can procure the items that they need to address their needs, be it clothing, be it food items, etc. There's a big movement that way. It helps the local economy. It helps people kind of meet their own needs and gives a sense of autonomy and ownership of decisions, which has big kind of impacts on mental well-being of displaced people, as well as then supporting the local economy and host communities. So there are risks involved in that. We like to say the risks are different, but not necessarily greater than in providing goods in kind. In many ways, when you provide people money, whether it's as a mobile money transfer or whether it's as an ATM card or whether it's an envelope stuffed full of cash, that's an asset which is much easier to conceal and manage than it is giving people boxes and boxes of tents and blankets and kitchen items and things. And so in many ways, it actually can reduce risk. The key is about risk for those individuals. It doesn't always, and there are situations where giving people money can actually be kind of increasing their exposure to violence or other kinds of risks. The key is really about knowing what those risks are that people face, and ways to mitigate that are often through how you transfer the money or how you're communicating with those communities. And often the biggest risk is when you stop these types of programs. And so when you stop providing cash assistance, then people can get really upset if it's not well communicated and if there's not strong engagement.
So can you also then tell us about the term survivelihood and the path to livelihood, and share that for the audience as well?
Sure. So the IRC, over the last number of years, we partnered with Tufts University and several other partners in different countries to look at the financial journey of refugees and displaced people and how they're managing their finances and their financial health through different phases of displacement, from the immediate all the way through to some of those longer term displacement contexts, which I was talking about. And what we found is that there are different people. People have different techniques for managing their financial well-being at different points in time, and so in the immediate phase is kind of a subsistence or survival phase, where it's mostly people are dependent on humanitarian aid, be that food assistance or cash assistance and things like that. And then after several months, roughly several months, it depends on the context and the individuals, they shift into a phase that we've termed survivalihood, or that the academics have termed survivalihood, which is where there's more, people are able to incorporate into their life more kind of income earning. And so small scale income earning potential, whether it's working as a laborer occasionally, or as a cleaner, or being able to gain slightly more autonomy over their income and able to manage that money, but still not at a point of being able to cover their needs. And then after that phase, people are slowly start building into more diversified income earning sources, greater management of their assets, including some reliance on financial services, being able to manage debt differently, and to take on debt in a comfortable manner. And then gradually, over a number of years, shifting into a state of financial well-being and health, where they're able to repay loans, repay debts, and actually be offering support and loans to other people, as well as having greater income and be able to shift to more self-reliance over time. So we've charted out this kind of framework of survivalihood being a stepping point of being able to meet some needs while still relying on the support of others, including humanitarian assistance and a mix of assets.
That's excellent. So, I like the point when you were talking earlier about, giving them more agency, going back to giving cash rather than goods that they can't carry around so easily, and the effect on mental well-being. So I'm going to shift to Iftikhar then. If you could, in your experience, share with us the medical facilities and the Hope Foundation that you've established at Cox's Bazar. How is everyone kept track of there? And typically, how long are these women in your care? And do you have the ability to follow up with them at predetermined times as needed after they're discharged? Or does the Hope Foundation also help with ongoing care for these female refugees?
Sure, thank you. So I want to acknowledge our government really managing these camps in a very efficient way. And the camp is managed by and governed by the government agency called RRC, I think Refugee Rehabilitation Commission. And they actually broke it down, that camp, in 34 sub-camps. And every sub-camps have a management system. We are under their authority. So we have access to certain communities from our hospitals and health centers. We have about 10 health centers, and we can, and every camp has a camp leader. So we work with them, we work with the community. So make sure that there is no care gap. And so in our the health, the care centers, we have a hospital and we have maternity clinics. All of them are 24/7 service providers, but maternity clinics provide the non-surgical services like safe delivery by midwives. But our hospital not only receive referrals from those maternity clinics, but across the camp, we accept referrals for emergency C-section. We also call it CMOM, Comprehensive Emergency Maternity and Newborn Care. So we provide that, and we also follow them up because of the camp system, the way it works. We work with the camp in charge's office, as well as the leader, camp leader from their community. So we follow up them, and also because it's been going on, the relation going on for some time now, we have actually established relation with the community. At the same time, there is something called health sector. Both of our panelists know that there is a health sector where all the information are being exchanged between all the providers. So we know what everybody needs. So, and they meet every frequently, and they have set meetings. They present their cases, they present where the things that they can help each other. That's how we put together, say, referral network. So we have, there is from health sector is run by World Health Organization. So under them, all the other UN agencies and local NGOs and other NGOs work. So there is a nice system there that, and that is why even though the resources are less than, say, host community, we call host community means the people of that community, right? Even though resources are sometimes less because of the location, because of their situation, because the number of people, but in a way it is run, and IRC is a big part of that system where everybody comes together, UNHCR, World Health Organization, the government, IRC, IOM, like International Organization of Migration, like this UN agency, and people like us, the local people, the local NGOs from the country, also international NGOs. We work closely with each other. That is why even with the limited resources, we are able to support these people in really I would say wonderful way. We do our best, and that's why that I want to thank all these partners that we work with. We work so closely with each other.
That's excellent. That's great to hear that there's so much collaboration. It's the only way it can all work, I would suppose, in such difficult circumstances. Gina, I'd like to go to you now. In your experience on the ground as a midwife, how long are patients within your care typically? And did your role also help with prenatal and post-birth care? And how long typically would patients be with you? And would they, when they're sent off, what is that process? I guess it depends on the situation, but if you can shed some light.
It definitely does.
Yes.
The majority of my experiences have been in crisis response settings. And so in a crisis response setting, we are focused more on acute care. So we're addressing acute healthcare needs. So that makes it more difficult to establish any semblance of continuity of care. Usually that happens once we start shifting into the stabilization phase, when there's clinics that are set up and the larger organizations are there. Often that's when we're able to establish a setting where we can have more continuity of care, much like Dr. Iftikhar is talking about in the Rohingya refugee camps in Cox's Bazar. So the amount of time a patient is in my care definitely depends on the circumstances. In Greece, Bangladesh, and in Ecuador, I was able to establish more continuity. Whereas in other areas where the refugee population is more mobile, I may only see somebody once, maybe twice, depending. One of the issues with this is that prenatal care is preventative care, and it can be very difficult to establish that. And so that's one of the first things that we're trying to focus on in any situation, is how can we develop some sort of continuity with this? And it's crucial, especially with those populations with higher mobility, because when we see them and address a healthcare need, knowing that we may not have follow-up, we don't know when they will have access to healthcare again, especially maternal reproductive healthcare. When I was working in the refugee camps in Greece, I was often working in some of the unofficial camps and settlements that had just kind of popped up. And in those settings, it was nearly impossible to register people, to track people. I mean, we were writing down names in a notepad, and it was just kind of like this running log trying to track everybody. Once the Greek authorities came in and established more official government-run camps, then the process of registering people, tracking them for healthcare needs, and following up became much easier. But at that point, they were out of our hands. So again, I was doing a lot more acute care and not as much continuity of care in the situations that I was in.
And one more detailed question about the situations you've been in. Is birth control being a thing? Is it being given to these refugees and displaced people? Or is that not even a thing?
So it is a thing, and it's an interesting thing to try and navigate in these situations.
Right.
When I was working in the refugee camps in Greece, we had donations of different forms of birth control coming in. We had a lot of different pills and hormonal contraceptive coming in. And we at first thought that we would just distribute it because a lot of people were asking for it. And culturally, that became a problem. We had a lot of issues arise where the husband of the family or the family thought that we were meddling, and it was not our place to provide that to the female partner. So we ended up taking that and having it sort of like, it's here, but you come take it. We can't distribute that. In other areas, I ran into an issue. So when I was working in Lebanon, there was an organization had come through and just kind of mass administered IUDs, which was problematic because after so much time, the IUD needs to come out and be replaced. And so we were having an issue with the IUDs replaced, and then there was no follow-up care with that. And so we had IUDs that had perforated, we had IUDs that had become partially dislodged, we had IUDs that had been broken, we had people who had developed some pretty severe symptoms associated with the IUD that they hadn't been properly counseled on. And so they were just living with these symptoms with nobody to address them with. And then this has been touched on before, but some of these refugee settings, people have been there for generations. And so when you have people here in long-term care, they will say things like, I've been dealing with this for the past 5 years since they gave me this IUD. I didn't really know what was going on. I was just told like, hey, here's this thing. And there's often a very significant lack of informed consent when it comes to administering different types of birth control. There's a significant lack of education in trying to say these are the options. And there's also an issue with trying to administer types of birth control that may not be appropriate for the population that it's being given to. So it's definitely a difficult thing to navigate, and there's a lot of cultural considerations that go into that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I can imagine it's very complicated depending on where you are. And very good, very good. So then if Tikar, I think I'll move on to you. As far as in your experience, have you seen the refugees with a means of communication? Either mobile phone, or is there a central location in the camps where the displaced people can communicate outside?
There are some limitations of mobile phone. They have some people have it, and they have to be registered. And because people actually live in a limited area, and since they have in-person communication, pretty good in-person communication through their internal system. So they really don't have that kind of expanded communication system. Some people have. Also the providers of services, either health or education or food, the providers do have access to communication system. So there are but there are still, I think that there are some needs to be more communication, so we can communicate with our colleagues in different part of the camp to ensure that we can exchange our the issues and also make the referral process seamless. So
Okay.
there are needs there.
Great. Thank you. And then I'm also going to ask you, Greg, as far as the mobile phones and a central location for communication, hoping you have some statistics perhaps on the percentage of people that might have mobile phones on them when they flee.
So a couple things that we could say about refugees and mobile phones, kind of globally speaking, so across contexts, is we know that roughly 50% of the refugee population, refugees are roughly 50% less likely than the general population to own a kind of internet-enabled phone. And so that's really relevant, because when we're talking about the role of technology, and there might be widespread use of mobile phones in a context, but having that connectivity is a real challenge.
Right.
And it's not only just for the kind of refugee status, but there's also highly gender dynamics to this as well. And kind of in general, we know that women phone ownership among women is substantially less than that of men. This is even more exacerbated in refugee contexts.
Right.
We don't have good data on that, but we know from specific cases and specific situations that it can range from that phone ownership difference can range from anywhere from 5 to 75% between men and women.
Wow. Great. Thank you so much. So on to you, Gina. We definitely have to bring COVID-19 into the conversation, because it's affected the whole world, and of course it's affected the most vulnerable the most. And it would be really interesting for the audience to hear how COVID-19 has affected your work with the individuals in your care.
Yeah, so during the COVID-19 pandemic, I was actually working in an under-resourced area in Ecuador. And we ran into a lot of issues during the pandemic. Number one, a limited access of resources became even more limited due to restrictions in movement. So any trickling in of supplies or resources that we had almost completely stopped. And that extended beyond just basic medical supplies to also food resources. And in the area that I was in, we ran into the issue of women being turned away by the hospitals. The hospitals in our area were severely understaffed already. And then with the COVID pandemic, became even more understaffed. And one of the hospitals only had student doctors on call at night, and no obstetricians were available in the evening time. So that was problematic. If we needed a transfer, we had no access to be able to transfer for a cesarean section, or to be able to manage any sort of complication that exceeded what we were able to do in an out-of-hospital setting. And we also ran into the issue of lack of food. So a lot of families not being able to leave their homes, being in very strict lockdown in Ecuador, we had to start finding ways to procure food resources and distribute food to people, because they were waiting on the government to do so. But again, restrictions in movement, the government resources coming in weren't actually reaching the people who needed them in a timely manner. And I think that those were the biggest ones, is just even greater restrictions in movement, greater restrictions in resources. Also, any sort of care, or now that the COVID vaccine is in circulation, being able to get those resources into these under-resourced populations, into refugee populations, is definitely, there's a significant lack there in discrimination.
Great, thank you so much. And on to you, Greg, if you could share with us how the work at IRC has been doing globally. How has it shifted due to COVID-19?
Yeah, great, thanks. I could say a couple examples from our work in Asia. There's been a big, our work has largely stayed the same, but how we are implementing that work has changed quite a bit. We used to be running large-scale education programs and reading programs based on schools and bringing students together, and we've had to shift that quite a bit. So shifting to home-based learning and supporting, developing radio programs to support reading at home, and then engaging with teachers by WhatsApp and SMS in order to be sharing lesson plans and information with teachers, who then can target a smaller number of students, kind of door-to-door support. That's an example from our work in Pakistan. In the health sector, we've had to shift quite a bit some of the types of healthcare services that we provide. So in Bangladesh, in the Rohingya camps, the IRC set up a severe acute respiratory infection clinic. It was one of the first facility that the IRC has set up of this type across the world, specifically to target and to treat and be ready for COVID patients. And that varies. And then we've also had to shift in places like Afghanistan, where we were not supportive and working in health, became very engaged in supporting the local health districts and facilities to make sure that they had things like strong triage protocols in place and PPE. And so we shifted more into a technical service provider for the healthcare provider. So we would help them and advise them on how to be ready and prepared to manage COVID within their facilities. We're, as an organization, we weren't providing that care, but we're able to help others who do provide that care to do so in a safe way. So it's our ways of working changed quite a bit, but the core services that we delivered continued running, even in our COVID times.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Everybody's had to adapt so much this past year and a half, and it's still ongoing. So I'm conscious of the time. And so as a way to sort of wrap up our discussion, I could go on asking you questions for another hour, but I know we have to cap this. So I'd like to ask you all to kind of share with us what you're optimistic about on this subject. I know, if anything, I mean, we need to be honest about the situation. So Iftikhar, why don't we start with you? Is there anything that you're optimistic about right now as far as improvements on the horizon for the plight of refugees and displaced individuals right now? Any new developments or shifts that can be considered positive? And feel free to add any final thoughts as well on what you feel needs to be changed to enable displaced people to assimilate into society more readily.
So my experience with refugees is only one place, unlike two of my colleagues that I only know what happened in Bangladesh. So I can share an excellent news with you today as a matter of optimism, which is that when the COVID arrived in Bangladesh, so there were some studies, and one study was published from Johns Hopkins, and it was predicted that there will be thousands of deaths every day in the camps, because there are 1 million people, and they're living next, very congested area, and they didn't have good health and all this. So there were predictions that there will be thousands of people will be dying every day. And, including IRC and everybody else, like Hope Foundation, we have put together COVID unit, and including, we have put together a 50-bed hospital ourselves from Hope Foundation. Total, there are about 517 beds, I think, but the plan for beds were somewhere around 2,000. So good news is that, as I said, again, the government, the partners that working there, they work so wonderfully to manage the camps in terms of the limitation of movements, lockdown, and awareness of the health guidance in the community, and the made to work with the community. And I tell you, in last about 15 months that the first COVID arrived in the camp, only 1,561 cases positive in the camp.
Wow.
And there are a lot of testing done,
Wow.
and only 20 people lost their lives. If you compare to that anywhere in the world, I mean, this is a stellar success, I would say, a success story that we should all be happy about. And I think this is a case study that people can do, that how it was managed so well that there is so less. And even when there is a like huge wave going on at our neighboring country in India, and in the COVID cases inside the camp is much lower than even our Bangladesh local community. So I say that I say that it is being managed, at least in our backyard, that's managed well, and this is a good news that I wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is very good news. Congratulations. That's great. So I'd like to ask Gina the same then. What, if anything, are you optimistic about right now as far as improvements on the horizon for everyone?
I would say that I feel the most optimistic about technological innovation. The COVID-19 pandemic dramatically changed the way that we do things in multiple contexts. We relied on technology in new ways, and more than ever, to continue to work, to communicate, to access healthcare, continue our education, and multiple other things. And I think it's also required us to really think outside of the box, develop alternative strategies to achieve things, and just generally approach things differently. And I consider this to be a strong catalyst for technological innovation that can be applied to improving the plight of refugees and displaced people across the world.
Thanks, excellent. And you, Greg, how do you feel as far as optimism and any improvements that you see on the horizon that you feel good about?
Well, I mean, just to say, I think what Gina and Dr. Iftikhar just mentioned certainly gives me a lot of kind of enthusiasm for the future. And I think in this work, it's often easy to focus just on what's not working well and just on what's bad in the world. I mean, something that I also think is quite kind of driving change in our sector in a good way is the maybe because of technology, but I feel like the populations that we're working with, our client populations, displaced people in the communities that they're in, are the voice of these people is coming through now more so than ever in history, and I truly hope that trend will continue, and I think it's a very disruptive and powerful force in the best possible way. And I think we don't always like to hear what people have to say. It might conflict with our own views and perspectives and the priorities that we've set. But I think that's how we continue to get better, all of us all together. And I think that's how people, that's how we find the end to displacement, is by hearing what drives people and what they need and what's going to make their lives better.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much. At this point, I'm going to ask my partner Vinita to join us again. And we want to thank you so much. We have to wrap up. I have another page of questions here that I wanted to ask you, but we'll have to do it another time. But thank you so much for your time and your insights and your expertise in sharing it with all of us today. This was absolutely insightful, and we thank you so much.
Yes, and I'd just like to wrap up, Mariko, by saying two things. One is that it's so fantastic to hear that despite all the challenges, there is hope for the future. And for me, collaboration and working together across sectors, across countries, sharing knowledge and insights is the way forward. So I'm so pleased to hear that. And the second thing I heard, which is absolute music to my ears, is, people like me who are very focused on financial health. I also recognize how important issues of mental health and physical health are. So to me, health and well-being crosses all domains. physical, mental, and financial health and well-being need to be addressed in a holistic manner, because people experience these challenges in their lives, everyday lives. And I think that the more we work across these sectors so that we support not just the financial health or not just the physical health, not just the mental health, but all of them in a person-centered manner, I think that that's the way forward. So once again, I completely repeat what Mariko said. We are so honored to have all of you. We could talk for hours, but we will let you go. But I hope this is just the beginning of a new and productive friendship across us all,
Yes.
as well as individually across all of you, because you obviously work together so well. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We are so privileged to have met all of you, and I hope that we keep this relationship alive.
We'd like to thank our audience as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to collaborating with all of our panelists in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.